Hello, and welcome to Unknowable, the podcast where we talk about all things mysterious, unusual, or unknowable. I'm Justine.
And I'm Gray. Some weeks we break down one larger mystery between the two of us. Other weeks we pick two smaller mysteries on a theme and teach each other about them based on our own independent research. This week, we're talking about a case that we've both been fascinated about for a long time.
Fascinated.
It's D.B. Cooper.
D.B. Cooper.
Or Dan Cooper, as you will find out is the more correct name.
But everybody knows him as D.B. Cooper.
D.B. Cooper.
Which, if he's alive nowadays, which we're just talking about and probably not.
Right.
For a lot of reasons, not least of which is the fact that he'd be in his 90s.
Right. Still possible.
Still
not
possible.
Probable.
But he'd probably maybe be a little annoyed.
Yeah.
Though Dan Cooper probably wasn't his real name anyways.
Yeah. We'll get into that as well.
Yeah. So, this case
Yes.
is awesome.
It is. It's really fascinating.
It's
the only unsolved air piracy case in the history of the United States.
which is amazing.
So amazing.
I actually did not know that fact.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
You figure anybody who hijacks a plane, we know who it was. They haven't gotten away with it.
Yeah.
It always ends in someone getting arrested. So this is the only case of somebody hijacking a plane and demanding ransom money and has never been caught. And there's been, 1,000 suspects that have been examined over the course of 40 years.
1,000 serious suspects, not even just people, but seriously considered.
Right.
None of them are it.
None of them, or maybe one of them was him and he just was good at covering his tracks.
Yeah.
So,
but he just disappeared into the night, literally.
Right. Literally.
Fucking awesome. So,
all right, let's dive in.
Wednesday, November 24th, 1971.
Yes.
Day before Christmas. Or Thanksgiving. Wow. Not Christmas Eve. Yes. Thanksgiving Eve.
Thanksgiving Eve.
A middle-aged man.
Yep.
With a black attaché case.
Okay. Like a suitcase, right?
Yeah, I really botched that. I was going into that I'm going to sound so classy.
It's so classy.
I botched it. Walks up to the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines, which...
In Portland, Oregon.
In Portland, Oregon, yeah. Sadly, not Portland, Maine. That would be cool. Portland International Airport.
Okay.
Identified himself as Dan Cooper.
Yep.
And purchased a plane ticket for $20 in cash.
$20 fucking for a plane ticket.
Amazing enough by itself. And the fact that you could just, I just can't even... I know you can technically do it nowadays, but I just can't imagine just going to the airport and buying a ticket at the counter. And
okay, I'm gonna get on this plane right now.
Yeah, I'm sure he probably walked up and got on the flight 30 minutes later.
Yeah, it's insane.
Which is crazy enough. The flight counter was probably within view of where you sit to board the plane.
Right, and I wonder if there wasn't even one of those tubes that you walk through to get to the plane. Maybe you could walk out onto the tarmac and then climb into the plane.
That'd be awesome.
It's wild. It's whole different era.
Whole different era. So he got on flight 305.
Yep.
A one-way flight 30-minute trip to Seattle.
Yep.
So just a little ways north. Yep. Got on the aircraft, Boeing 727.
Yep.
Took seat. Actually, the seat that he took is up for debate.
Interesting.
Weirdly enough. 18C, some say it was 18E, some say 15D, doesn't really matter.
Interesting.
It was the rear of the passenger cabin.
Okay.
Lit a cigarette, got a bourbon and soda.
Because it's the 70s.
It's the 70s. People described him later as a man in his mid-40s, between 5'10" and 6 feet, black lightweight raincoat, loafers, dark suit, neatly pressed white-collared shirt, black clip-on tie, and a mother-of-pearl tie pin. Wow. Tie pin.
Mother-of-pearl tie pin.
Pie tin.
Pie tin.
Pie tin still works.
Yeah. That will factor in later.
It will factor in. So, the weird thing that got me about this flight is that it confused me when I first read it, because I was like, wait, what? It was a flight from Washington, D.C. to Seattle. So you see my confusion, because I'm like, wait, he got on the flight in Portland. Washington, D.C. to Seattle, with stops in Minneapolis, Great Falls, Missoula, Spokane, and Portland along the way.
Okay.
So I was telling Nate this morning, I'm like, did planes just operate like buses at the time?
I guess so.
It started in D.C. and it was just stopping at all these places and people were just getting off and on.
Interesting.
Along the way. That's so
I guess
weird.
that would make sense. I mean, that's probably still kind of how it works. If you have a layover somewhere.
Yeah. Some people get on, some people get off.
You don't always get back on the same plane.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. But it just seemed weird there were so many stops. I mean, I'm sure that I would think that there must be some flights that have, more than one stop nowadays.
Right.
Maybe I've just never been on a flight with more than one layover, but...
Also, if you were on that plane and you got on in Washington, D.C., and you're already been on the plane for, 8
Yeah.
Like however many hours it takes to fly across the United States back then.
Right.
And you're at like the last leg. You're like, I got 30 more minutes and I'm
30
there.
more minutes.
And then this bullshit happens. You'd be so pissed.
And you didn't even know what was happening until after.
Right.
Which, I mean, it would have been scary to know in the moment, but
right.
Still. So it was about a third full when it left Portland, on schedule. Shortly after takeoff, Dan Cooper, supposedly, handed a note to Florence Schaffner, the flight attendant nearest to him in a jump seat. And she just assumed that it was like a phone number from a lonely businessman. She didn't even look at it. She just dropped it in her purse. And he was like, you probably want to you better look at that note. I have a bomb. Which is like,
it's not so subtle.
You're already so annoyed. You're like, yeah, she's on her last leg too. She's probably been on this flight the whole time too. And she's just like, son of a bitch. Like, she's already like, fucking dude, give me his number.
Right. Here we fucking
go. And then it's worse. It's like, no, I have a bomb. Cool. So my sad thing too is that this note does not exist anymore. I like totally wanted to look it up and see it.
Yep.
But
he was smart. He asked for the note back.
Yeah, he got the note back. But she said it was printed in neat all capital letters with a felt tip pen. The exact wording unknown, but she recalled the note said that he had a bomb in his briefcase. Shitty. He told her to sit next to him. She did. She asked to see the bomb. This part also gets me because he opened his briefcase. She saw 8 red cylinders. She said 4 on top of 4, attached to wires coated with red insulation and a large cylindrical battery. So there was like this video on YouTube that I watched for some fucking reason that was like this woman recounting the fact that her husband, who was some type of mechanic, like not a car mechanic, but he worked on some type of machinery, had gotten a package in the mail, and she had no idea what it was and didn't know he was expecting it, and she opened it, and it looked something like that.
Interesting.
It looked like what she thought like a bomb might look like.
Right.
And she freaked out, and she had like, they had like 2 kids, and they had a dog, and she like lost her mind and was like, oh my God! And like got the kids over to her neighbor's house. She was like losing her shit. She realized she left the dog over there. She had to like go get him. She was like convinced the house was going to blow up. And then she ends up, like, calling the husband, like, in hysterics or whatever. And he was like, yeah, that's just some stupid thing that he got. But I was, like, thinking, I'm like, somebody could show me anything.
Oh, yeah.
If they said it was a bomb and it looked like what I've seen in movies, I would be like, oh, shit, yeah.
Yeah, you don't know.
So I'm like, does anybody actually know? He may not have actually had even a real bomb.
No, right. And I think that's kind of the thing is that, like, it was like like, nowadays, it would be a way bigger thing. But I think back then, they were just sort of like, oh, like, he's got a bomb, like, we'll just take his word for it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? He's not going to want to blow up this plane with himself on it. So as long as we just play by his rules, like, nothing bad's going to happen. But it just didn't seem like there wasn't a whole lot of scrutiny about the bomb. There wasn't, like...
No.
Like, yeah, like, it literally could have just been 8, like, cardboard tubes that he threw together.
I feel like, anything. And especially, if we're on a plane, I mean, she probably wasn't freaked out, but I would be freaked out. Like, but you're already in, like, a high-stress situation.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody says, I've got a bomb, and, like, you peek in their briefcase, I would just, okay, sure.
It's gotta be, right?
But as far as I could tell, nobody besides her saw it.
Interesting.
So, I mean, yeah, it makes sense that they would just take his word for it. They're not going to be like, let me see that.
Yeah.
But...
prove it.
It's just, it's, like, weird that he just... Whatever. So, he wanted $200,000.
Yep. Which is the equivalent of $1.2 million nowadays.
Which is insane. Really, when you think about it.
Right.
Doesn't seem like that long ago.
No.
Kind of was
40 years, but yeah.
But in negotiable American currency.
Which is a weird way to phrase that.
Super weird.
No just regular old American dude would phrase it that. It'd be like, they would just say, I want $200,000.
Yeah.
Period.
It was an odd clue to give.
Yeah.
That still doesn't fully connect to anything definite, but yeah, it does make you think he's not your average just dude.
Right.
I mean, clearly he's hijacking a plane, so.
That'll factor into some of our theories and conjectures about who he might have been and where he originated from.
Yeah. Yeah. He wanted 4 parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, and he wanted a fuel truck in Seattle to refuel when they got there.
Right.
They told the pilots, whatever. And the thing, I love this too. When she returned, Cooper was wearing his sunglasses. Yeah. He was like, yo.
I wear my sunglasses
on the plane.
Yeah.
Which, I'm not sure timing wise. I know when they landed, it was like an hour past sunset, so I'm not sure if it was like dark on the plane at this point, but still, just the fact that she came back and he was just like, yo.
Right. Just like all like slick with his sunglasses on.
Like, I bet you wish you got that number now.
Right.
No.
Which, like, why didn't he put the sunglasses on before?
Right.
If he was trying to, like, I get the impression he was probably trying to, like, hide his identity.
Yeah.
Maybe he just figured that there would be, like, more scrutiny, or they'd try to, like, photograph him when he landed or something.
Right. It was kind of my thought that you wouldn't... The thing that gets me, too, is that if they were asking me later I mean, maybe because the plane wasn't very full. But if you asked me later, like, remember that guy 2 rows ahead of you or whatever? Like, what did he look like? I would have no idea.
No, especially just like some like generic white businessman.
Yeah,
just
some
like
dude
wearing a business suit.
Like, there's no way I'd remember that he had like, I mean, maybe the flight attendant, sure, but like she remembered his tie pin. Like they could tell, like how could you even tell he's wearing a clip-on tie? Can you really like identify that easily? I don't even know.
Maybe. I mean, it was the 70s. You weren't like distracted by your smartphone, so you're sort of like
just staring at everybody,
observing your surroundings more.
Yeah, it always gets me. Like I just feel like I don't pay that much attention to people.
Right.
Like again, back to the Men in Black episode. Like that's why I wouldn't know if somebody was following me because I'm just not looking. So I feel like they'd ask me like, oh, like remember that dude sitting next to you on the plane? I'd be like, no.
Like what? There was a guy sitting next to me.
I didn't pay. I just like was glad he didn't talk to me.
Exactly.
There was one dude. Okay, it's a brief moment. I was on a plane the one time next to Nate, my husband, but on the other side of me was this dude, and he kept like putting his head down, and I would think that he was sleeping. And of course, me being creepy, I was trying to look out the window, and he was in the window seat, so I'd be trying to like look. And I kept noticing that he had his head down, like, and his eyes mostly closed, but they, like, weren't all the way closed. And I was like, what the fuck is he doing? It was very disconcerting. Yeah, I was like...
Maybe he's, like, meditating or something?
I don't know.
Maybe he's one of those people whose, like, eyes don't close all the way when they sleep?
Yeah, it was like... It was almost like when I looked out the window, he, like, understandably would think I was looking at him, and I could kind of see his eyes, like, shift towards me. And I was like, oh, you're not even asleep. Like...
Yeah. Oh, weird.
Ugh. Anyways. Being on planes sucks.
Yeah.
So the pilot contacts air traffic control, which in turn contacts the authorities. The other passengers, of course, were just told there's a mechanical error. We're going to be a little delayed.
Right.
The Northwest Orient's president authorized the payment of the ransom, of course. Like, who would be like, nah. All employees to cooperate fully. Whatever. They circled Puget Sound for 2 hours to get the FBI and everybody enough time to get the parachutes and the ransom money. Which... Again, I wondered why they took so long to do that, but turns out they like photographed every bill of the ransom money.
Right.
So that they could track it later on to find this dude.
Which will become significant later.
It will. The flight attendant noticed that Cooper appeared familiar with the local terrain.
Yep.
He like looked out the window at one point and was like, oh, it looks like Tacoma down there.
Yep.
Which is a weird thing too, that you would know that. He also correctly mentioned that McChord Air Force Base was only a 20-minute drive at that time from the airport.
Right, which is like a weird piece of knowledge. Like I wouldn't know that. We were talking like I'm sure there's Air Force bases or just Army bases in general in Maine, and I have no idea where any of them are.
I don't know where any of them are. Like the fact that he knew how far of a drive it is.
Right.
Indicated to me that he had probably been there.
Right. Or had some sort of like working knowledge of it where he would have to know like the distance between that Air Force base and SeaTac Airport.
It's just weird. And like, why would he mention that?
Right.
Just, of all things, like, why would you say that?
Right.
I don't even know. But the flight attendant described him as calm, polite, and well-spoken.
Yeah. The
stereotype at the time was, the enraged, hardened criminal.
Right.
Or Wikipedia described it as, quote, take me to America political dissidents. That were associated with air piracy at the time, which I think is funny because I don't really think of a stereotype nowadays.
Right.
Of, like, air pirates.
Right.
Which is funny anyways. Another flight attendant agreed he wasn't nervous. He seemed rather nice. He was never cruel or nasty. He was thoughtful and calm all the time. So he ordered a second bourbon and water. He paid his drink tab, which, in the middle of a hijack.
Right.
And he attempted to give the flight attendant the change and offered to request meals for the flight crew during their stop in Seattle as, part of his demands.
So he was clearly, he was
a nice guy.
Not a dick. He wasn't, he seems just like a well-spoken dude who, had a really solid plan in place and didn't need to be nasty because he had the bomb to control everybody. So all he had to do, he had no beef with the flight attendants or anything. He was just trying to, do his thing.
Yeah.
So one of the investigators described him as this nasty, cruel individual, and it's no. Just because he stole money doesn't mean he's a terrible person.
Right.
He stole money from this giant airline.
Yeah. I guess I'm never really of the opinion that I don't know, I feel like some people treat all crimes on the same level. Essentially, he broke the law.
Right.
It's yeah, but he didn't hurt anybody.
No.
He didn't kill anybody.
It's almost a victimless crime.
Yeah.
I'm sure that airline was fine financially after that.
Oh yeah, they were fine. And nobody was injured, nobody was hurt. Again, people were probably a little shaken up because that would probably be terrifying.
Right.
Not knowing if he was going to blow up the plane or what he was going to do.
Right.
But ultimately, nobody was hurt.
Right.
They've all got a cool story to tell.
Exactly.
And he's gone. So, so they got the ransom money from several Seattle area banks, 10,000 unmarked $20 bills. Pretty crazy.
Right.
The Wikipedia even like said most of them had the 1963A or 1969 series. Like, okay.
Right.
Cool. And yeah, they had a microfilm photograph of each of them. He did not want the military issue parachutes from the Air Force Base. He wanted civilian parachutes with manually operated ripcords. So they got them from a local skydiving school. We were talking about this too. It was interesting that he didn't want the military ones.
Right. So our impression is that the military ones, you don't pull the ripcord. It just like kind of like you jump out of the plane and it just automatically deploys. Like you don't have control over when you pull the ripcord.
Yeah.
So I think you'd have less control over where you landed with a military one, whereas the civilian one you could sort of like free fall for as long as you wanted to and then pull the cord at a certain time. And give yourself more control, I guess. Which,
I don't know. It seems, again, it'll come up later that he didn't seem to be that experienced with parachuting, but you would think maybe if he knew more about it, like I don't know how much you can control your trajectory when you're parachuting, if maybe he wanted that, ability to free fall. And we also talked about like it being really hard for them to determine where he landed because of not knowing when he pulled the ripcord.
Right.
Because that free fall time makes a difference, a big difference apparently.
Right.
So maybe he wanted it for that reason, so they wouldn't be able to so easily be like, okay, he's within this radius. We can find it, but who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
Maybe he wasn't familiar with the military ones, even though some people thought that he might have been military.
Right.
I don't know. So, 5:24 p.m. He's informed his demands have been met. They land at the airport. He wanted them to go to an isolated, brightly, wow, I suck today, lit section of the runway and close each window shade in the cabin to deter police snipers.
Right.
Smart. They got him his stuff. They got all the passengers, the flight attendant that he had given the note to off the plane, and the senior flight attendant to leave the plane. So he just had, I think, the pilot, the co-pilot, there was like a flight engineer, and then that other flight attendant.
Interesting.
And that was it. And then him. So only 5 of them.
Right.
On the plane. So he like outlined his plan with the cockpit crew, which I just think is like funny to imagine that they're all just like, what's next?
What are we doing?
What do you want to do?
Where are we going?
Where are we going, guy? So he wanted to go toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft, which was about 115 miles per hour, which seems crazy. It doesn't seem like that fast.
No, not at all.
For a plane. Maybe I don't really know that much about planes, but that just seems not fast. At a maximum 10,000 foot altitude. He wanted the landing gear to remain deployed, and in the takeoff/landing position, the wing flaps be lowered 15 degrees and the cabin to remain unpressurized.
So he knows a lot about planes.
Yes.
He was very familiar with this plane that he was in.
Yeah. He knew about Boeings.
Yeah.
Which will come up later.
Yes, it will.
So, interesting, the wing flaps being lowered, like...
Right, like to 15 degrees, like I wouldn't know that.
Yeah, I wouldn't know that. So the co-pilot informed him that the aircraft's range was limited to about 1,000 miles under that flight configuration, so they'd have to refuel. They discussed options, and they agreed on Reno, Nevada as the fueling stop, which, again, it's just, like, funny to me that he was just like,
how do you feel about Reno? He's like, okay.
Sure, that's fine. They were gonna leave with the rear exit door open and the staircase extended, but the, like, Northwest Home Office objected, saying it was unsafe.
Right.
Apparently Cooper was like, it's totally safe, but he, like, was like, fine. And then he just put it down once they were airborne. He's like, I don't give a shit.
Right.
But he, like, didn't seem like he didn't want to cause, like, a altercation.
Right.
Which still seems funny, because it's like, you got a bomb, you're totally in control, but he was just like, okay, yeah.
I think it's because he knew that he had a solid plan and that he, like, all this stuff was just, like, super trivial.
Yeah.
And he just wanted to, like, get off the ground as fast as possible, because him being on the ground was the most dangerous part of this for him.
Yes, because they couldn't really do anything. I mean, when he's only in the air with 4 other people, 2 of which are flying the plane, they can't really do anything to him.
No.
They don't have weapons. They don't have any way to, like, take him down.
Right. And, like, he has a bomb, so they're not going to, because he could set off that bomb at any time.
Yeah. So he was safe in the air. So I think, he just wanted to get off that, like, runway.
Right.
Just be like, let's just fucking go, dudes.
Right.
The FAA tried to get a face-to-face meeting with him. He denied them. The refueling process was delayed. This is still in Seattle. Vapor lock in the fuel tanker truck's pumping mechanism, which he became suspicious of, but he allowed a replacement tanker truck, which that one, I guess, also, like, ran dry. They had to get a 3rd truck in.
Jesus.
I'd be suspicious if I was him.
Oh, yeah.
I think, like, I'd be like, what the fuck are you guys up to?
Right.
What are you delaying this for?
Right.
You're clearly, like, doing something to get somebody else here.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't. They let them leave. 7:40 p.m. They took off.
headed for Reno, Nevada, or headed for Mexico City by way of Reno, Nevada.
Yes. There were two F-106, F-106, I don't know, fighter aircraft from the Air Force Base that followed behind them, one above it and one below, out of his view to kind of like see what was up.
Right.
Which I guess they never ended up seeing anything.
Yeah, which is strange. Maybe they were just so far away that they weren't tracking.
Yeah.
Like specific small occurrences. They were just literally tracking the plane to see where it was and where it was going. Yeah,
to make sure they like stayed whatever, but they have no idea. So he tells the crew to go in the cockpit and just chill. The flight attendants saw him tying something around his waist when they kind of went into the cockpit. At 8 p.m., a warning light flashed, indicating that the aft air stair apparatus... I have a hard time with that one.
Right.
I had a hard time like typing that out multiple times. Had been activated. The crew's offer of assistance, they like went over the intercom and were like, "You need help?" And he was like, "No."
Fuck off, guys.
Yeah, like it said that it was curtly refused. So he's like, "No!" I'm just picturing him like yelling back. Yeah. Like not even over the intercom, but he's just like, "Fuck off. I'm done." So they... soon after, noticed a subjective change of air pressure, so indicating the door was opened. Mm-hmm. And then at like 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section sustained a sudden upward movement, significant enough that they had to like adjust the plane to get it back level. So they kind of assumed that that was when he jumped. But I thought it was odd. It didn't say, like, it seemed like they just stayed in the cockpit. Right. Even when they like felt that, they were just like, nope.
Because they weren't sure he could have, you know, who knows what he's doing back there.
Right.
Like, he could blow us up if we go back. Because I think he said specifically, don't come back here or I'll blow you up.
Oh, did he?
Blow up the plane, yeah.
Oh, shit. Yeah,
so
they were just like,
they were like, no, we can't. Like, it's like that classic, like,
yeah,
you know, keep your head down. If I see you put your head up, then you're dead or whatever.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
they landed at 10:15. So 2 whole hours later, they're just in that cockpit, just like,
right.
Fuck. Landed in Reno. They all surrounded the jet. They didn't know for sure that he wasn't there, but they checked and he was gone.
Right.
So they assumed that 8:15-ish, the change in pressure followed by that upward movement was him.
Jumping out of the plane. Aft stairs.
Yep. So, yeah.
That's
pretty much the end of it. He was gone.
He's gone.
Never been seen or heard from again.
There's been a few little like breadcrumbs here and there of like evidence that's been found after the fact, but nothing that really advances the investigation all that much.
No.
Just, if anything, it just causes more confusion.
Yeah.
Like, for example, in 1978, so about 7 years later, they found in the woods in Castle Rock, Washington, which is an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah. Castle Rock.
There was a placard that had instructions for lowering the aft stairs on that particular plane was found, and it was in the general trajectory of where the plane was flying over.
Yeah.
So that it would be a weird coincidence if 7 years later there's a placard to lower the aft stairs on the exact plane that he hijacked in the basic flight path was found. Like that seems like a lot of like...
That wasn't his plane.
Right. So it kind of had to have been from him, I would imagine.
It'd be cool to be the person who found that.
Right.
I would have loved to find that.
I don't even know if I'd give it up.
No. Just be like, this is just mine now.
Right, this is mine.
This doesn't help the investigation, really.
And then the other significant thing that was found was in 1980, a little boy who was camping with his parents was digging on the banks of the Columbia River.
And
what's that?
I said the Tina Bar.
What? Tina Bar?
Tina Bar.
Oh, Tina Bar is a part of the Columbia River he was in, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So he found 2 packets of 100 $20 bills and then 1 packet with 90 $20 bills.
Damn.
And the serial numbers matched the serial numbers from the ransom.
Yeah.
And there's debate as to whether or not they were buried intentionally or if they just washed up on that spot and were buried by the sediment from the river. Yeah. There was one expert who said that like the rounded edges of the bills indicated that it had just like essentially fallen into the river and washed up on the shore. Other people have said that like, no, it was probably buried intentionally and could have been dislodged. Yeah. But yeah. And other than that, there's really been no definitive evidence really like found since then. No. There's been a few things that were left behind. Like he left behind in the plane his mother of pearl tie clip.
Yep. They found his clip-on tie, the tie clip, and 2 of the 4 parachutes.
Left in the cockpit after he jumped or whatever happened.
Yep, along with 66 unidentified latent fingerprints.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right, because you had a whole plane full of people.
Right. And one of those parachutes, so he left behind 2 of the 4, and one of them had been opened and like some of the suspension lines had been cut.
Right.
Which they theorize that he used to close the bag of money and like secure it to his body.
Right.
But
so let's talk about the parachutes.
Yeah. So the parachutes, there's some interesting info about that as far as looking through my notes. Definitely can't hear me doing this. It's definitely not happening.
They gave him 4 parachutes.
Yes.
No, they gave him 3 parachutes.
4 parachutes.
4 parachutes.
Yeah.
And he chose the oldest parachute.
Yeah.
And the parachute that also had a dummy reserve chute.
Mm-hmm.
So he chose basically the oldest one that was also like a classroom instruction one that wouldn't function correctly if you jumped.
Right.
So it was clearly marked to anybody who was an experienced skydiver that this was a dummy reserve chute.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why he should have picked that particular parachute unless he literally knew nothing about parachutes.
Right.
But it's also strange, as we were saying, that he chose not to have the military one.
Right.
He chose the civilian ones.
Yeah. Which, again, is that a lack of experience with the military ones and he wanted something he had used before?
Right.
This would indicate that he wasn't that experienced with civilian ones, but I guess,
right.
I don't know, if I had used any parachute before, I'd probably want the same one that I had already used.
Right.
Or the same general type. But, I don't know. Yeah, they thought that was odd that and the FBI stressed that the inclusion of the dummy parachute was not on purpose.
Right. Well, because, so he was really smart because he asked for 4 parachutes, implying that he might jump with some of the hostages.
Yeah.
So that they wouldn't just give him a dummy parachute. They would give him fully functioning ones because they don't want, like, civilians to die.
Exactly.
So he thought all this out, like, very well.
Yeah.
So it's just an interesting dichotomy that he's really knowledgeable about planes, but not knowledgeable about parachutes or
right.
like jumping out of planes in general.
Which is interesting.
Right. It's an interesting combination.
I don't know, and I guess really like jumping out of the plane was probably the smartest move if he's trying to escape because like guaranteed if they had landed anywhere and he had taken off, like they would have had so much of a smaller radius to know where he went, they probably would have found him.
Oh yeah.
There was no way for him to just be like, drop me off.
Right.
Like he kind of had to. But yeah, the FBI said that like they initially thought he was an experienced jumper, or even like a paratrooper.
Right.
But after that, like they said, no experienced parachutist would have jumped in the pitch black night in the rain with a 200-mile-an-hour wind in his face, wearing loafers and a trench coat. It was just like too risky. He didn't know that the reserve parachute was only for training. And he didn't like want a helmet.
Right.
He took the older and technically inferior of the 2 parachutes to jump with. And jumped into like negative 70-degree wind chill without any protection against the cold.
Right.
Like literally just jumping in a suit in a trench coat.
Right.
So,
I guess we don't know that he wasn't wearing like long johns or something.
No, that's true. He could have been wearing stuff underneath, which
like,
I would think, I guess would help in negative 70, but wouldn't be super fun.
Right. It wouldn't be fun.
But there's really no way for him to like, ultimately, practically, there's no way for him to be dressed how he like should be dressed without tipping off. Like, how are you going to get on a plane?
Right.
Dressed like you're about to jump out of a plane.
And so they like theorize that he wore like one of the possible reasons that he was wearing such a smart suit was because he knew after he jumps out of the plane he'd have to find a way back, probably hitchhike or find a way to like get a ride back to wherever he's going. Yeah. And so, some guy wearing dirty blue jeans coming out of the woods isn't going to get picked up as easily as like a guy wearing a suit. Yeah. So
he wanted to look nice and sharp.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, of course, like theories that he just died. Yep. Diving into the wilderness without a plan, without the right equipment, those shitty conditions. And they even like a lot of the places they were looking for him were like very mountainous. Mm-hmm. So just the idea that he would have landed somewhere and maybe not really known where he was. I mean, you're kind of, even if you know you'd have to know the area pretty well, I think, to know exactly where you were when you landed from jumping out of a plane. Right. In the pitch black. In the pitch black. Yeah. It's not even daytime where you can like, as you're, free falling or as you're floating down, like look around and be like, okay, there's, mountain, whatever. And that's if he didn't get stuck in a tree. Right. Like you're like into like a forest essentially. So you're falling into like dense tree cover. Yeah. In the dark. Your parachute's almost definitely going to get caught in the trees. Yeah. If the parachute even deployed at all. Right. We don't even know. Yeah, there's no said no evidence that he requested or received any such help from the crew as far as, like, timing the jump just right.
Right.
To land in a certain area that he knew. Like, again, if he knew the area pretty well, because he jumped. I mean, they were still 2 hours from Reno. Right. So it's not like he jumped when they were, like, right around Reno. He jumped, like way still up in, like, Washington.
Right.
Which I thought was interesting, too. That he even, like, specifically requested going towards Mexico City, was cool with them stopping for fuel, which maybe is why he didn't really care that much that they had to stop.
Right.
Because he knew that he was going to jump long before then.
Oh, yeah. And it sort of lends credence to the fact that he probably knew the Northwest of the United States better than anywhere else. That's the reason he would jump there, because he was more confident in his ability to survive the jump and, like, know where he fell and be able to find his way back.
Yeah. Yeah, because if they took off at 7:40 and then they're thinking that he jumped at, like, 8:15, he really didn't wait long.
Not at all.
So.
And I've always thought, too, that, like, they don't know that he jumped at that time. There was that disturbance where the tail lifted up as if something fell out of it, but who's to say that wasn't the money?
Right.
The money, that's just the sheer volume of money that they gave him was heavy.
Yeah.
So he could have tied the parachute to the money or just thrown the money out, then he could have parachuted at any time.
That's true.
So he could have jumped out, because I feel like the money falling out of the plane would have been more of a lurch in the plane than him jumping out of it.
I don't know. There was something they did, like an experiment at one point. Let's see. Where is that? Damn these notes. They did an experiment where they kind of wanted to see, essentially they wanted to see if he had jumped at that time. They, like, went back through the flight with the same general flight path or whatever. And they wanted to see if he did jump at around 8:15, where might he have landed? So that they could at least just get some idea of a general radius to, like, go by. If I can't even find it. But they had done something where they had, like, pushed, they described it as like a sled, which I don't really know what it was.
Right.
But they pushed, like, a 200-pound-ish sled off and found that it, like, produced the same lurch as what they felt when they thought that he jumped.
Interesting.
Which, yeah, I don't know exactly how much $10,000, $20 bills weigh, but I would imagine it's not as heavy as a person.
I don't know.
I guess is my guess. That it wouldn't necessarily be 200 pounds.
Right. So maybe it was.
I don't know.
I just think that, like, nobody saw him jump then, so the fact that that happened, it could be, I don't know. We don't know that he jumped at that moment.
No,
so
there's
we could be looking in the totally wrong place for him. I mean, those bills were found there, so maybe he did just throw the money out and it landed in the Columbia River or a tributary of the Columbia River.
Yeah.
And then he jumped at some other point. He didn't even care about the money. He just wanted to see if he could do it.
Yeah, he's a thrill seeker.
Right, thrill seeker.
Which is kind of an awesome thing.
So let's talk about the aft stairs as well. The fact that he knew exactly that this Boeing was the only type of plane in service at that time for commercial airlines where the aft stairs could be lowered during flight and was able to continue operating basically with the aft stairs open was not commonly known.
Right.
They said that, like, people who worked at Boeing would know, and then a handful of CIA operatives who, like, used that function in, like, operations overseas would know that ability.
Yeah.
But it definitely wasn't common knowledge at that point.
Right.
So the fact that he knew all these intimate details of this plane, from the exact like measurements or whatever to put the plane at, and like all this stuff, and that he could operate the aft stairs, like he was able to open it with a button in the back of the plane.
Yeah.
He didn't need any interference from the cockpit, and the cockpit couldn't prevent it from happening.
Right.
So he knew enough about this to know that his plan was totally foolproof.
Yeah.
So that maybe implies that he worked in the airline industry, or I don't know, maybe for the CIA and had done operations like this.
He definitely knew his shit. Like, I think that's part of the reason why I'd imagine that he seemed so calm.
Right.
Was that this wasn't something that he had done some research and heard some stuff and was just like, oh shit, like I hope I can pull this off.
Right.
Like he, according to all accounts, was super calm and polite and just knew what he was doing. He was confident that it was going to work.
Right.
Because, I think he had that, like, working experience of this particular plane and this particular, like, type of situation where he wasn't nervous about, like, oh shit.
Right.
Even, like, nervous about, I mean, again, who knows what happened, but didn't seem like he was necessarily even nervous about, like, am I going to live through this?
Right.
Like, he was just like, I'm good, I got this.
Yeah. Like you'd think like if he was like at all nervous that he was about to die jumping out of a plane, that he'd be a little bit more like anxious.
Right.
But he was super calm.
But he seemed chill. Yeah, it's amazing to me too that like there were tons of people being questioned. Like they initially began questioning suspects and considered more than 800 as like semi-serious.
Right.
And all of 800 people, all but 24 were eliminated like immediately. They were just like, no. I liked that there was an Oregon man named D.B. Cooper.
Right.
So this is going back to why he's even called D.B. Cooper.
Right.
Oregon man named D.B. Cooper, who had a minor police record. He was obviously a person of interest. They're like, maybe he used his real name.
Right.
On the off chance. But he was quickly ruled out, and a local reporter who was rushing to meet a deadline got confused and reported that name.
Right.
And so that became like the pseudonym of the hijacker, when really, and Dan Cooper, like we're not too far off, but it kind of got like widely reported and it was like, whoops. And it was like too late at that point.
Right. So
people knew him as D.B. Cooper.
The name Dan Cooper is probably taken from a comic book series that was released in Belgium.
Yep.
Where the main protagonist is a Canadian Air Force pilot named Dan Cooper.
Dan Cooper.
Who did all sorts of exploits, and there's one specific, like, edition of it. What's the word I'm looking for? One specific issue of the comic where he jumps out of a plane, and like on the cover of it is like Dan Cooper in like full parachute gear, like flying through the air.
Yeah.
So people think that he probably took the pseudonym from this comic book series.
Yep.
But the interesting note is that it was never translated into English and sold in America.
Right.
It was only ever released in Europe, and the closest to North America it ever came was it was released in Canada.
Yep.
In its native language. So that would lend credence to the fact that either the hijacker spent time in Europe, probably as a child, reading these comic books.
Or as a tour of duty.
Or he was from Canada and had grown up reading the comics.
Which again is negotiable American currency phrase.
Exactly.
Lends some credence to the idea that he like wasn't an American.
Right.
Originally. And he didn't really have a noticeable accent. So most likely not like originally from Belgium or something like that.
And if he was from Canada, jumping so soon after taking off from Seattle might have just been so he would stay as close to Canada as possible so he could just slip back over the border.
Yeah. Just slipping over the border.
So the other weird thing is that none of this ransom money has ever turned up.
Never.
Ever. Except for that stuff that was found in the Columbia River.
Yeah.
That's the only ransom money that's ever been found.
Which even that was like in the same order as what they had given him. So that seemed pretty likely that it was never like messed with by him.
Right.
That it was there from like when he landed, or he ditched it right after or whatever.
Or
like
buried it, just hide it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's theorized that he hided it. Oh my god. Woo! Theorized that he hid it. Theorized that he dumped it because he was aware that he couldn't use it. It was interesting that they were talking about the Lindbergh case.
Yeah.
Right. Was pretty recent at that time. And that, I think, did it say, I'm not super familiar with that case, but that like somebody ended up getting caught because of using one of the bills that had been part of the ransom or whatever.
Yep, and so it was the ransom note as well, which is why he asked for the note back that he handed that said he had a bomb. Yeah, because they used like handwriting analysis or something in order to figure out who it was.
Yeah, because it said that he was like intelligent enough to ask for like the unmarked bills or whatever, but must have been knowledgeable enough to know like I still can't spend this.
Right.
Which is the funny thing that like I think anybody getting ransom money, like you have to kind of know that.
Right.
Like they're not just giving you any random money. They're giving you very highly traced money, and they're like watching for it everywhere.
Because even if he had done something like he started to like launder it, or he exchanged it, or I don't know, at some point one of those bills would have turned up in circulation somewhere. They would have come back through a Federal Reserve Bank. Yeah. And they would have caused like an alarm or something.
It would have tipped something off.
It's not like he probably has never used that money.
No.
I can't imagine a circumstance that he did and it hasn't turned up.
Exactly. It's just not even possible. Like they even have, I think at the least at the time for a while, if not like even to present day, they had like public access to those serial numbers for those bills. So like you can even go on there yourself and like look up those serial numbers.
So I wonder, unless, I don't know, if it was spent maybe in another country, it didn't make its way to the Federal Reserve and just like, I don't know,
Yeah.
Never made it into circulation. I guess it's
like
possible, but I don't feel like it's probable.
Yeah.
Because even then, like, say in the 1970s, he spent some bill in, like, Central Africa, and at that point, like, the D.B. Cooper thing hadn't made it there.
Yeah.
That bill would probably find its way back into a Federal Reserve Bank at some point in the last 40 years. So, like, no matter where he spent it, I feel like it would end up alerting somebody somewhere.
Yeah, and that's part of it, that it's been so long. It's not like this happened even 10 years ago.
Right.
And it's like, well, there's still plenty of time. He could just be biding his time to spend it or whatever. Which is why, again, there was like a theory that, he just was like desperate for money, which is why he did it. And like, I don't buy that at all. Because again, of all the ways to get money in sketchy ways, hijacking a plane and getting a ransom is probably the worst. Because again, you cannot spend that money. Like, even if you find some way to kind of hide that money and not spend it directly, it's gonna pop up somewhere. It's gonna set off some alarms. And at the very least, they're gonna like slowly trace their way to you.
And he was way too calm about it too. I feel like if he was in a dire financial situation, he would have been more like agitated the whole time, or like just more like on edge. He seemed way too like calm, cool, and collected to be like needing this money for, I don't know, some operation, or I can't even imagine.
He's got like a brain tumor.
Right.
And he's just like, fuck, I need this money. Like,
I think he just did it to see if he could do it.
For funsies.
Yeah.
He was just like, this is going to be sweet.
Right.
Like you were saying you were reading about the timing being relevant.
Oh, yeah. So this occurred November 24th, the day before Thanksgiving. So this was at the beginning of like a 4-day weekend from like a 9-to-5 office job. So it's possible that he timed it at this time because he had 4 days off from work and could then like hike his way out of the mountains of Washington and like make it back to work on Monday.
Yeah, right. Because the FBI said they checked around and there was nobody reported missing.
Right. Nobody disappeared that weekend.
Would make sense because there's no work to say like, hey, this guy's gone. We obviously have no idea if this guy was married or had a family or whatever. So there's not necessarily anybody to be like, oh yeah.
Right. He could have just told his family like, I'm going on a work trip. I'll be back on Monday. Yeah.
And then he showed up on Monday and was just like, hey.
Yeah. So let's talk about his potential place of employment.
Yes.
Because this is an interesting. So this is where we stop sort of conjecturing and we actually get into like some hard scientific fact.
Yeah.
So like obviously in the 70s they didn't have the same kind of like analytical ability to like take something and like analyze trace stuff on it. So fairly recently, it was a group of like amateur
citizen sleuths
in
2009.
Yeah, they got his tie and his tie clip, and they did some analysis of what trace was left on it, and they found bits of unalloyed aluminum, bismuth, aluminum, and cerium.
Yep, and titanium.
Oh, unalloyed titanium, rather.
Yes. Particles of pure unalloyed titanium.
Which was rare in the 70s. It wasn't quite as ubiquitous as it is nowadays.
Nope.
So they said that it would make sense that he worked in some sort of chemical manufacturing plant or basically some place where you'd come in contact with rare earth metals relatively frequently and would be wearing a tie.
Yeah.
Because it was on the tie specifically.
That he was possibly an engineer or a manager.
Right. So it would make sense that he had some 9-to-5 office job where he had a working knowledge of like chemicals and planes and there's a theory that he actually worked at Boeing. Yep. Because there was this one specific like kind of, I think it was classified like supersonic plane that was being worked on. Sure. And a lot of these rare earth metals were being used on that project at Boeing. And so it would make sense that he had a really good working knowledge of the actual mechanics of the plane. Exactly. But not a working knowledge of jumping out of said plane.
Right. Not so much the parachutes. Right. But he was like, yo, I know this plane. Yeah, they said rare earth minerals such as cerium and strontium sulfide. Right. And that, one of like the rare applications for that was Boeing's, supersonic transport development project.
Interesting.
Which is crazy.
So he probably worked at Boeing, maybe, and then had a 4-day weekend and was like, yo, I'm going to hijack this plane because I can jump out of it.
I'm going to hijack this.
And just did it for
what else do you do during a 4-day weekend?
Right.
I mean, even the, according to the FBI's retired chief investigator, Ralph Himmelsbach. Yep. Sure. He said, extortionists and other criminals who steal large amounts of money nearly always do so because they need it urgently. Otherwise, the crime is not worth a considerable risk. Alternatively, he may just have been a thrill seeker who made the jump, quote, just to prove it could be done.
Which I think that makes the most amount of sense.
It does sound like it to me.
Like, given his whole demeanor, just the way that this whole thing played out makes me think that it was for a lark.
Yeah.
Or just to see, like, you're sitting in your 9-to-5 job every day. You're just kind of like bored as hell, and you're like, you know what you could do? You could jump out of a damn plane and steal money this way.
You could hijack a plane.
Why not?
And just get the money for fun.
Right.
Yeah, it's amazing to me, though, like, even if he had done it for fun and if he jumped, I mean, again, I think the parachute and them, essentially, like, even if they could go up and do that experiment and see, like, okay, a 200-pound weight push off the plane, this is kind of the radius we get, you can never recreate those exact circumstances that night. Like, again, it mentioned that there was, like, a rainstorm when he jumped or over wherever they exactly were at that moment. Mm-hmm. That can play a factor, like, so many different things, like the wind that was happening, like, aside from just the speed of the plane, and them having no idea how long he just fell before he pulled the ripcord.
Right.
There's really no way for them to pin down anything exact, and they kind of extrapolated his landing zone. It was like this area on the southernmost outreach of Mount St. Helens, a few miles southeast of Ariel, Washington. Oh, I like that name. Near Lake Merwin, which is like an artificial lake formed by a dam on the Lewis River. If anybody knows the area,
right,
go check it out.
Go check it out. Go
there. Look for him. They searched the area. They encompassed like the terrain south and north of the river. There were like people from nearby counties, like sheriff's deputies and stuff, searched large areas of the mountainous wilderness on foot, by helicopter. They had door-to-door searches of local farmhouses to see if he had like hidden out somewhere. They were like checking barns and shit.
Right.
They had search parties running patrol boats along Lake Merwin and like another lake that was a reservoir nearby. Nothing was found. Like not a single thing.
Right. Which even if he like landed in a tree or something with his parachute, I feel like that parachute would be in the tree still.
Right.
He probably would have just cut himself down.
They found nothing. The FBI did an aerial search. They used fixed-winged aircraft and helicopters from the Oregon Army National Guard along the entire flight path, which is interesting. It's known as Victor 23, but in the like the D.B. Cooper literature, it's been known as Vector 23, which I don't know. It was cute. So they looked from Seattle to Reno. They found broken treetops. They found pieces of plastic and like things that they thought looked like parachute canopies, but nothing. Once they investigated, nothing was relevant. And then, they waited until the spring thaw in early 1972, because this was, November. I don't really know the weather in, Washington that super well, but I know they have, a winter, but it's not, Maine winter.
Right.
But still, they waited for the spring thaw. FBI agents, aided by some 200 Army soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers, did a thorough ground search for 18 days in March, and then they did another 18 days in April. So, a solid over a month's worth of daily ground search.
Yeah.
They used a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin, that lake that they thought was right about there. A skeleton was found, but it ended up being a teenage girl who had been abducted and gone missing and obviously been murdered just a few weeks before.
Classic serial killer town.
Yeah, but I'm sure in that moment they were like, shit,
Dan Cooper,
we did it! But no. The search operation, arguably the most extensive and intensive in U.S. history, found nothing.
Nothing.
Not a single thing. Nothing was really found until that placard in the later 70s, and then that money, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's freaking it. Yeah, they sent the serial numbers to all kinds of places. They had a reward. The reward seemed shitty, though. Maybe at the time it was more. It was only 15% of the recovered money. Weird. To a maximum of $25,000. That's not that much money.
Oh, it's really not.
To be dude, I broke this awesome case.
Right.
Here's 15% of the recovered money.
Right. So
it's not even 15% of $200,000.
Yeah,
Lame.
that's shitty.
Yeah, Northwest Orient cheaped out.
Yep.
Cheaped the hell out. Maybe that's why nobody cared.
Exactly.
They were like, why don't you give me all the recovered money?
Right.
No. They released the numbers to the public in early 1972, so they wasted no time being like, hey, y'all solve this.
Right.
We can't do it.
Exactly.
2 dudes got counterfeit $20 bills with the serial numbers. They were trying to swindle Newsweek for $30,000 for an interview with some dude they claimed was D.B. Cooper.
Huh.
But they were swindlers.
Interesting.
So yeah, the entire 60-volume notes from the investigation are going to be preserved for historical purposes at the FBI headquarters in D.C. And on the FBI website, 28-part packet full of evidence open to the public.
Dang.
So for any of you listening,
go check it out.
And for us, we should go check it out.
Right.
But yeah, they yes, we talked about the DNA from the tie.
Yep.
Nothing. Dude's just a mystery.
Right. I think we should start getting into some of the maybe people.
Yes.
Because so disclosure, we're not going to be able to talk about every single person who has been like who has a decent chance of being DB Cooper, because there's a ton of people out there who have been put forward as a potential DB Cooper.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, like, there's like, you know, like 2 or 3 things will like really fit the DB Cooper like story, but then there's something that's like, oh, but like X, Y, and Z, so it's probably definitely not this person.
Yeah. And there's partly a lot of people because they only just suspended active investigation of this case in July 2016.
Right.
This is only not even 3 years ago that they were like,
They're saying, like, we're not actively investigating it, but please send us any, like, evidence you have and we'll evaluate it.
Yeah, the case is still open.
Yeah.
But yeah, they processed over 1,000 serious suspects between 71 and 2016.
Jesus.
So there's obviously a lot of serious people.
Right. And also some of it is different, too, because, like, they're like, oh, this person was like a paratrooper in Vietnam, or this person, like, there's a lot of it that was working on the old assumption that he was really skilled, a really skilled, like, parachuter. And so, like, people put forward someone, but then it, like, turns out, like, no, actually, this person probably wouldn't be that type of person because of all the things we talked about.
This dude wasn't very good with parachutes.
Right. This dude was not.
Maybe not a paratrooper.
Right.
Yeah, so you've got your dude you favor.
Yeah. So this guy, Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., so he was an Army veteran from Vietnam, and he was a helicopter pilot. So that made sense to me that he would have some kind of working knowledge of aircraft, but wouldn't have the specific knowledge of jumping out of an aircraft.
Yeah. He was an avid recreational skydiver, though.
Right. Oh, was he?
Yeah.
See? All of these.
I know.
But so
nobody really fits.
He was interesting because he committed a copycat hijacking April 7th, 1972. So a year after... Not even a year. Less than a year after DB Cooper's hijacking. He hijacked a Boeing with aft stairs in Denver, landed in San Francisco, and then was flying to Mexico. Yep. Bailed out over Provo, Utah.
Damn.
Again, he asked for 4 parachutes. He left the note behind. Yeah. Which is what got him caught.
And fingerprints on a magazine he'd been reading.
Right.
Fool.
So he landed, survived, and when they found him, he had some of the ransom money on him. Damn it, so dude. He definitely committed this crime. He also never said that he wasn't DB Cooper. They asked him specifically, and he would just sort of give, like, non-answers.
Interesting.
He never said he wasn't. But he was an avid skydiver. So maybe, maybe the whole no working knowledge of parachutes thing, maybe he did that on purpose. Maybe he was good enough at like being a parachuter that he knew he didn't need the reserve chute and took it to throw the scent off of him. Right. But this, I don't know, maybe this guy, he doesn't seem quite as...
This guy sucks. He got arrested
organized.
2 days later.
Right.
He got
definitely not as organized.
45-year sentence. He escaped 2 years later. With several accomplices. They crashed a garbage truck through the main gate.
Yeah. Oh, I've heard about that.
And they were tracked down 3 months later in Virginia Beach. He at least had like a nice little vacay. Yeah. But then he was killed in a shootout with the FBI. So he's dead.
He's the closest I could come, and I don't even fully buy that.
Yeah. No, there are definitely like things that, and that's like, again, with all, if we went through all the suspects, like every single one, there's definitely a few that I read about, and I'm like, that doesn't even like match at all.
Because it's usually just somebody saying like, oh, I think my brother, or I think my husband, or someone, I think this person is DB Cooper because some like 2 or 3 things. Yeah. Who was your guy?
So my guy was, well, not really my guy, but this is like my favorite story that I heard about it. Dwayne L. Weber, World War II Army veteran, who served time in at least 6 prisons from 45 to 68 for burglary and forgery. Okay. Interesting. So his widow, he had 3 days before he died in 1995. So 20 years later. Right. He told his wife, I am Dan Cooper. So he's not. He's Dwayne Weber. Right. Said he was Dan Cooper. She said that name meant nothing to her, which I guess, 20 years after. Yeah. I don't know how popular this case has always been. You know, like, I feel like there's definitely, like, been a resurgence, weirdly.
Yeah.
At least in my perception of, like, unsolved mysteries and stuff.
I agree.
Partly from the show Unsolved Mysteries, which D.B. Cooper has been on.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, the name didn't mean anything to her. And, again, she's very different from me in the sense that I think if Nate was on his deathbed and said, I am, you know, Dan Cooper,
right.
I would, like... after, you know, some short period of grieving, would, like, start looking up that shit to be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
That name means nothing to me.
Yeah, like, I'm not even going to look into that.
I'm dying.
So, months later, a friend of hers told her of its significance, like, in conjunction with this hijacking. So she went to her local library to research D.B. Cooper. She found this dude, Max Gunther's book, who had written a book, like, I think in the mid-'80s on the case, and discovered notations in the margins in her husband's handwriting. Now, again, this was not pre-D.B. Cooper. It's not like he was looking up some book to, like, study what he was doing. But still, he had been to the library, read that book, and made little notations, which I wish I knew what the notations were.
Right.
But still, she, like, recognized her husband's handwriting in the margins.
That's wild.
She recalled, in retrospect, that her husband once had a nightmare during which he talked in his sleep about jumping from a plane, leaving his fingerprints on the aft stairs. Which is, like, what? He also reportedly told her that an old knee injury had been incurred by, quote, jumping out of a plane. He drank bourbon and chain smoked, which...
Who didn't in the 70s?
Who didn't in the 70s? I mean, even in the 90s.
Right.
Other circumstantial evidence, he had a 1979 trip to Seattle and the Columbia River, during which Weber took a walk alone along the riverbank in the Tina Bar area.
Interesting.
So this was only 4 months before that kid made his ransom cash discovery in the same area.
Right.
Like, that's too crazy.
That is.
They eliminated him as an active suspect in July 98 when his fingerprints didn't match any of those processed in the hijacked plane, and no other direct evidence was found. And his DNA failed to match the samples that they got from his tie, but they weren't... The Bureau has basically said that they can't be certain that the organic material in the tie came from Cooper or not.
Right.
But still, no fingerprints seems odd. I mean, I can't imagine that D.B. Cooper didn't leave a single fingerprint anywhere.
Right.
But that was just my favorite thing, that, like, somebody confessed on his deathbed, just days before he died. And then you find that out, you're like, what?
Then you find his writing in the book?
Yeah, his writing in the book, the trip. I mean, the trip is, like, too...
Right.
I can't remember if it said... I don't know if I knew where they lived. I think, like, their closeness, like, their proximity to that Columbia River area would be somewhat important to me, I guess. Like, if they were just, like, super close by. But I feel like if they, like, specifically went to that area, like, for some other reason.
See, my perception is it sounds like he was a D.B. Cooper enthusiast and was really interested in the story.
Perhaps.
And so it would make sense that he went to the Columbia River almost as, like, a pilgrimage.
Right.
To just see, like, where it might have happened and see if he could, like, maybe find some money or something.
Yeah, because that wasn't that long. I mean, 1979, that was only, 7-ish years after it happened. So, yeah, he could have just been like, oh, cool.
Like, what a cool story. And then, like, checked out that book from the library and was making notes in it because he just wanted to read up on the story.
Yeah.
I feel like the real D.B. Cooper wouldn't do that.
I mean, the nightmare was interesting, but even the nightmare, if he was really into the case, he was thinking about it a lot, that shit gets into your nightmares.
Right.
Like, I have nightmares about weird stuff, or even just dreams about weird stuff all the time that I'm, like, just thinking about a lot, and then it pops up, So if
you're just, like, fascinated by this case and you just keep obsessing about it, it would make sense that it came out in your nightmares.
Yeah. He told her that the knee injury was, like, from jumping out of a plane, but there's no
He could have been, like,
evidence.
sort of crafting this whole mythos his whole life.
Yeah.
Like,
he just wanted to be...
like, create, like a good story, you know what I mean? Like, a way, like...
I mean, kind of a cool thing to leave your wife with, honestly.
Right.
Because, again, he didn't... It wasn't, like you find... Like, you're not like, oh, yeah, I was Jack the Ripper.
Right, I was the East Area rapist.
Yeah, like, yeah, sorry. And you're like, fuck, come on. Like, at least you're like, whoa, my husband was cool.
I am the Zodiac.
Yeah, like, no! But it's kind of a cool thing. So that was just my favorite story. And I think, I don't know where I heard that one, if that one was on Unsolved Mysteries, but I was just like, what? Like, that would be just such a cool thing. Again, I can't imagine Nate telling me that he was somebody totally different before he died and me not, like, immediately looking that up.
Right.
Like, I feel like I'd leave him on his deathbed to, like, go Google, like, who are you?
Right.
What are you talking about? But, yeah, she, like, didn't even think of it. But yeah, the hijacking marked the beginning of the end for unfettered and unscrutinized commercial airline travel.
Yep.
Which, again, talking about this earlier, like, he just walked in, bought a cheap-ass plane ticket, probably just hopped around the plane that was just making, like, its stops across the country, Just no issues at all. Despite the initiation of the federal Sky Marshal program the previous year, 31 hijackings were committed in U.S. airspace in 72. Jesus. Almost half of those, 15, were unsuccessful copycats of Dan Cooper.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Interesting.
19 were for the specific purpose of extorting money, and most of the rest were attempts to reach Cuba. In 15 of the extortion cases, the hijackers also demanded parachutes.
Interesting.
In early 73, the FAA began requiring airlines to search all passengers and their bags. So that was like the end of that shit. They're like, nope.
Fuck this.
No more bombs. There were multiple lawsuits apparently charging that such searches violated Fourth Amendment protections against search and seizure, but federal courts ruled that they were acceptable when applied universally. Mm-hmm. So as long as everybody searched, we're cool, and when limited to just searches for weapons and explosives.
Right.
So, which again is weird to think about because like our entire life traveling has been like that. So it's like hard to imagine. I just can't even imagine they had a time when you just walked onto a plane and they had no idea what was on your person.
Right.
You could have had a knife or a gun or like any other thing.
Right. It'd be more similar to getting on a bus nowadays, like a Greyhound bus.
Yeah. Actually, that like even getting on trains, when we were in Europe, we took several trains because we were in Brussels. Mm-hmm. And we took a train to London, we took a train to Paris. And I remember like being freaked out by how there was like nothing.
Yeah.
I think maybe the train to London was a slight, like just in the fact that you like walked through a thing.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure the train to Paris was just like, just go sit in a waiting room and then just hop on. And I was like, wait, this is it?
Right.
Like even the the bus we took from Boston to Maine. I'm like, somebody could have something on a bus.
Oh yeah.
It's not quite as scary as a plane. But if somebody had a gun on a bus or had a knife or something, like nobody would know. They'd literally you just walk up and hand your ticket and then hand them your bag. They don't know what's in the bag. There could be a bomb in that bag.
Right.
I mean, I guess like at least when you're coming from the airport, you probably don't have a weapon because you just got off a plane.
Right.
But if you're going anywhere, I mean, I could just go from my house and buy a bus ticket, get on the bus with anything.
Yeah. It's very similar.
They don't search shit.
It's crazy.
And me being me just spends the whole trip just looking around at everybody. I do that anytime I'm flying. I'm like looking at everybody. I'm like, are you going to do some weird shit?
Right.
Please don't do some weird shit. Sometimes you have like flight groups that you're with and you're looking around and you're like, these look like good people.
Right.
Like that woman looks like my grandmother.
Right.
Like those people over there have kids. Like they're probably not going to bomb the plane.
Right.
I'm just looking around at everybody, but then there's like always somebody. Or like a group of people that I'm like, you're up to something.
Like the guy next to you on that plane with his eyes half open.
Yeah, it's like watching. I'm like, what are you up to, man? I want to like ask you what you're doing, but I don't want to be weird. But you're being weirder.
I don't want to know what you're doing, but I want to know what you're doing.
I want to know what you're doing. Yeah, it was super weird. I think I was like reading a book too, so I was like, part of me was thinking that he was trying to like read my book while I was reading it, and I was like, bro, we can share.
Right.
I'll put it on the divider between us and we can both read it. Just, you have to stay at the same speed as me.
Exactly.
It was weird, but yeah. Oh, and then in the wake of the copycat hijackings, the FAA required that all Boeing 727 aircraft be fitted with a device later dubbed the Cooper vane, V-A-N-E.
Cooper vane.
That prevents lowering of the aft air stair during flight. So you can't do that anymore.
It's wild.
That's crazy. And the installation of peepholes was mandated in all cockpit doors so that the cockpit crew could look at people's in the cabin. People's. Wow. People's works. Without having to open the cockpit door. Super cool. And other random tidbit. In 2013, the owner of the skydiving school that gave the parachutes was found dead in his home.
Oh, yeah.
In a suburb of Seattle. A homicide due to blunt force trauma to the head.
Interesting.
Which the perpetrator remains unknown. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's really like any super good reason why they like. It's not like he ever saw him or did anything.
Right.
But yeah, some people of course think there's a link, but authorities said that they just thought it was burglary.
Right.
But it just is interesting that he died of blunt force trauma to the head, like he was murdered in his home.
I guess if Dan Cooper jumped with that like shitty parachute that had the dummy reserve chute, and like was harboring a grudge about that, but like we were saying, he'd be in his 90s right now, so he'd be like in his mid 80s when this happened. So why would he choose that time to go bludgeon somebody to death? Like that's a very physical way to kill somebody.
Right.
And if you're in your 80s,
we're going to assume that the owner of the skydiving school was also fairly old at that point.
Right. So like an old man beating another old man to death.
Yeah, like
it just doesn't seem likely.
Seems unlikely, but I just like the little connection.
Yeah, it is interesting.
It's just weird.
Interesting connection.
That's Dan Cooper.
That's Dan Cooper.
Which I still love it, and I like love it more that there's just no. There's no solution to this.
Truly unknowable. Yeah. We will probably never find out who DB Cooper was for real. Or maybe we will, and that will be super exciting.
It would be amazing. because I want to know so bad.
Right.
And they're like, there's a pretty good like composite sketch of him and everything. Like, it's amazing that nobody.
That's the thing is both of our guys bear a very striking resemblance to the composite sketch.
Exactly.
Which is part of what made me think like, oh, I could see that.
Yeah, this could be a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like either he died after parachuting, or he has died at some point in his life since then.
So what do you think? What do you think's the most likely? If you had to decide, what do you think happened to D.B. Cooper after he jumped?
Man. I like, as usual, I feel like my brain splits into like 10 different things. I'm like, well, those conditions weren't great, so he probably died. But I also don't want him to have died.
Right.
Because it would suck. I have no real clear indication of like who he was, but I would really like to think that he survived, ditched the money, but he didn't really care about the money.
Right.
Because that was not his goal. And yeah, that he just like got out of those woods, was picked up by somebody. Like, I think kind of ruins it for me in a little bit, because I just can't imagine that there was somebody, unless he found his way to like make his way back home without like having to hitch a ride.
Right.
I would think that somebody would have mentioned at some point, hearing about that case, like, oh yeah, I picked up a dude in a black suit that just came out of the woods. Unless
he had arranged some sort of transportation.
That's true. He could have. I mean, he had everything else figured out to a T. Right. He definitely could have had somebody on hand. Right. So, yeah, my thought is, that he did survive. He did it for fun, for the thrill, to see if he could do it. Got out of the woods, and just, like, went back to work on Monday.
Lived a happily ever after.
Yeah, to his, like, boring, office job or whatever. He's, like, some crazy, I don't even know. Yeah, chemist at work in a tie. And, like, he's just known for the rest of his life, just like, yeah, I did that.
Right.
He's seeing all these copycats. And
he doesn't need the notoriety. He's just cool knowing that he did it.
He's the only, like you said, the only person that has committed like any form of air hijacking that has not been caught.
Right.
Which is pretty cool.
It's wild.
Yeah. So I admire him.
Me too.
I hope in a way that he's still out there somewhere.
I agree.
Maybe he was like already, if he had like a decent high up job, like if he worked some high up job at Boeing, he probably had decent money anyways.
He didn't need the money.
He did not need that money.
That's why he was so calm, because the money was just like, he just needed like a reason to do it,
Yeah, exactly. You don't just hijack a plane just to jump out of it. You got to get some ransom.
Maybe he fucking hated Northwest Orient Airlines and was like, fuck these people.
Yeah, fuck these people. Like, I wonder, I'd be curious to know if that whole situation like affected their sales of tickets. I'm pretty sure Northwest Orient Airlines does not exist any longer.
I've never heard of it.
That was also a long time ago.
It could have just been like a subsidiary that's been bought by whoever.
I'd be curious to know what happened to their like business after that.
Or like that specific plane. I wonder if that plane's just sitting somewhere.
Oh, that'd be cool. Damn. Right. They did say that like a few of the bills that they found, that kid found on the beach, like were auctioned off somewhere.
Really?
So it seems like potentially just some regular people like have those bills.
That'd be dope.
I would want one of those bills.
Oh yeah.
Be super cool to like find one of those 20s.
Right.
Somewhere along the way. Like I'm just starting to like obsessively check the database. Like every time I get a $20 bill, like, is this one? And yeah, I think if I found it, I would just be like, this is mine.
I think so too. I don't think I'd turn it in.
The FBI is busting down my door right now. They're like, you fucking already have one, don't you? We know you do. Help us with this case. No, but I love him.
Yeah, I agree.
I love him a lot.
It's one of my favorite like unsolved mysteries, just because it's pretty like lighthearted.
Yeah.
Like we were saying, like we don't think he's a bad person.
No, he's a nice guy.
Great story. There's tons of detail, but not too much detail.
Yep.
We will probably never know who it was.
Perfect example of just like YOLO.
Yep.
He was like, you only live once. I'm going to hijack this plane. And he got away with it, so he's never done anything crazy since.
Right, because he like had his fill.
He had his fill for his whole life. He's like, I'm good.
Yeah.
Freaking cool. So yeah, episode 15.
D.B. Cooper.
D.B. Cooper, a.k.a. Dan Cooper. We'll still title the episode D.B. Cooper because people will just be like, some dude, Dan Cooper. And they'll be like, oh wait, D.B. Cooper?
Whoa.
Oh shit.
Is that what the D stands for?
That's what the D stands for. Dan Billiam Cooper.
Billiam?
I just made that up.
Oh. It's like, what?
So sorry. Yeah, episode 15. So definitely make sure you leave us a review or at least rate us on Apple Podcasts.
Yep, that's a huge help.
Huge help to get us out there.
Right.
Check out our Patreon.
Always new stuff being added.
Always new. Always check it. There's going to be developments.
Yep.
Check us out on Instagram and on Facebook. And ultimately, just talk to us.
Right. Comment. Send us a DM.
Tell us what you like, what you don't like, anything we could do differently, or if there's anything you want to hear.
Some kind of topic that you are fascinated in and want to hear us ramble about.
Yeah, we'll do it.
Right?
Give us some ideas.
Tell us a story.
All right. That's Unknowable.
Unknowable.
Unknowable. Love you.